Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that we ran on in 2020. So obviously what we got to talk about today is the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. And this was totally unnecessary. A diplomatic resolution was on the table when U.S. and Israel attacked. The foreign minister of Oman, Badr Abu Sadi, was mediating the talks between the U.S. and Iran. And because he didn't trust Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to give the straight scoop back to the Trump administration, he traveled to the U.S. This was Friday before the war started. The last day of talks was Thursday. And he wanted to make sure that the American people and administration knew what happened in that meeting. So he went on U.S. media to say a deal was at hand. And he went on Face the Nation on Friday, and he said Iran committed during the talks to renounce the possibility of amassing nuclear material that will create a bomb, that Iran pledged to zero accumulation of enriched uranium, zero stockpiling of enriched uranium, and full and comprehensive verification by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And the liar-in-chief, Donald Trump, claimed that Iran refused to make any concessions on its nuclear program, which was a bald-faced lie. The fact is the Iranian commitments were stronger than the ones that were in the nuclear deal that Obama forged with Iran and then Trump tore up in his first term. So this war was totally unnecessary. And of course, this does nothing for the pro-democracy forces in Ukraine. It strengthens the hand of the hardline rulers in Iran who are backed up by 150,000 Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps troops and an estimated 300,000 to a million more in the Basij volunteer militias. First day of the war was a terrible atrocity. 181 people, mostly children aged 7 to 12, and their teachers were killed in an airstrike on a girls' school in southern Iran. And Al Jazeera has done an investigation that documents that U.S. intelligence should have known, and if they didn't, they're incompetent in terms of what they were hitting. And the New York Times analysis out yesterday documents that the U.S. hit this school several times with precision munitions and just, had to know what they were hitting. So this is a crime on the scale of the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. Another thing I'll just point out that's kind of bewildering is that the Iranian Navy, which is sunk, never left port. And you have to wonder, did the Navy or the whole military decide they weren't going to defend the clerical regime? Or, was it just lack of communication and given the attack on Iran and the Navy didn't know what to do? But in any case, that is kind of strange. And then, what is the strategy of the U.S. and Israel? I think Israel just wants to destroy Iran as a coherent state. The U.S. seems to want a client state. So there's some conflict there, but we'll put in the chat an article by Zoltan Grossman, which he posted almost immediately as the attack began. And I know Zoltan, going back to the Labor Farm Party of Wisconsin, when we brought it into the Green Party movement in the late 1980s. And he's a political geographer. He teaches out at Evergreen State in Washington. And this article was in Counterpunch. And he points out that 40% of Iran is ethnic minorities: Kurds, Azeris, Baluchis, and Arab Azawis. And in fact, most of Iran's oil is in the Arab majority Khuzestan in southwest Iran, right near Iraq. So if the U.S. puts land forces anywhere, it could be to control Khuzestan and its oil. And as Zoltan points out, if the Iran state collapses into ethnic enclaves, the civil war and conflict could go on for years and years. So, check that out. That'll give you some sense of, Iran being a multinational entity, not just, a Persian nationality. And, there are all kinds of bad scenarios that come out of this. If the Marines do a land incursion, say to open up the Strait of Hormuz by landing in Iran near there, they could get their asses kicked by the much larger Revolutionary Guard and besieged forces. They could be captured and become bargaining chips for the regime. U.S. Special Forces or CIA paramilitary officers, if they go in to, do special operations, they could get captured and, become bargaining chips. It's not beyond the realm that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps could try to invade the oil corridor of the Arab Gulf states on the western side of the Persian Gulf. In fact, they tried to do that toward the end of the Iraq-Iran war, which was between 1980 and 1987 or 88. And then another, scenario is that Turkey will take advantage of this opportunity to invade Kurdish lands in Syria, Iraq, and or Iran to continue their genocidal war against Kurds. We already know that everywhere from Turkey and Azerbaijan to the Gulf states, as well as Israel, U.S. bases in the region have been hit. Iraqi militias that are Shiite and aligned with the Iranian state are attacking whatever military targets they can find in Iraq. This is a regional war now. And one of the really crazy things that came out this week is Marco Rubio blurted out that the U.S. was forced to attack because Israel was going to do it. And Rubio said, well, if Israel did it, then Iran would strike back at U.S. military assets. So the U.S. had to strike first. And we'll put a Nick Church article in the chat that provides the details of that. One of the consequences that, for us as Greens, we should be aware of is that Rubio's statement prompted Brian McGinnis, who is the Green candidate for U.S. Senate in North Carolina. He's a former Marine. He went to a U.S. Senate hearing in his dress uniform. It was a hearing with the Joint Chiefs of Staff to protest that Americans don't want to die for Israel's war on Iran. McGinnis is also a firefighter in Raleigh, North Carolina. And in the scuffle with Capitol Police and bizarrely the Montana Senator Tim Sheehy, McGinnis's arm was broken, got caught in the door and the door closed on it and you could hear the bones snap. And Anthony Aguilar, who's a Green candidate for the House of Representatives from North Carolina, has a report about this on Twitter that we'll put the link to that in the chat as well, where he shows an x-ray of the two broken bones in his forearm. And so McGinnis is in surgery or has been in surgery. The newspapers reported he faces 7 charges, 3 for allegedly assaulting officers, 3 for resisting arrest, and a further count of unlawfully blocking a Capitol passageway. We'll put the full video of that, what happened. And he was speaking up, to charge him with assault is ridiculous. He got assaulted. But as Anthony Aguilar points out, McGinnis has not been charged. He hasn't seen a judge. He hasn't been arraigned because he's been incommunicado. He's gone to a doctor for surgery, but his wife and family, his lawyer, his campaign team have not been able to contact him, at least as of yesterday when Anthony put out this, video statement on Twitter. So now Anthony, if you don't know, was the whistleblower who exposed The shooting of Palestinians lining up for food at the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation by Israeli Defense Forces and contractors hired by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Anthony was one of those contractors, and he was appalled by what he saw. It was murder. Almost 1,000 Palestinians were killed trying to get food from this so-called humanitarian agency. So we'll also put Brian McGinnis's website in the chat for his campaign, and I hope people will give him a donation. There's also out there a GoFundMe, and I'm not clear that it's actually authorized by him to pay for his medical expenses, but you can look for that and check that out. So, good on Brian McGinnis and Anthony Aguilar for speaking up. And, the repression is just getting worse, the way they're treating this guy. A Marine Corps veteran who, both of them are Marine Corps veterans from our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, Anthony is an Army veteran. And this is how the Trump administration is treating veterans who disagree with it. It's fascistic what the Trump administration is doing. So then on Thursday and Friday, Trump, said some more outrageous stuff. Thursday, he said he wants to pick the next leader of Iran. And then on Friday, he just said he demands unconditional surrender of Iran. Trump is out of his damn mind. Who would the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps surrender to? U.S. forces on the ground? Is that what that implies? And to think that Iranians, not only, the regime supporters, but regime opponents would accept a leader of Iran chosen by Donald Trump is, Trump's living in a fantasy world. The problem is he's getting a lot of people killed. Now, the Iranian left, of course, is totally opposed to this war, but they also don't want people opposing the war to give political support to the Iranian regime. And we'll put a link to a statement by an Iranian socialist, feminist, and secularist named Maryam Namazi. And I'll just quote a little bit about what she said. To people like us, we need independent global solidarity. In other words, independent of the Iranian regime. She says it's vital that labor movements and left-wing forces around the world raise their voices against this war. However, this must be done on an independent basis, not as part of coalitions with groups that back the Iranian regime. Our solidarity is with the people, not the oppressors. She says our message is the U.S. and its allies are not saviors. Their goal is to control the political and economic map of the region. At the same time, the Iranian regime uses this war to stay in power and stop the people's movement. The only way to a bright future for Iran is through the organized struggle of its own people, the workers, the teachers, the women, the youth. No to war, no to the regime. So, I'll just add, if the international left does not show solidarity with popular Iranian struggles for human rights and democracy, it discredits the left in Iran. And, we're dealing with an international capitalist system, and our eco-socialist opposition has to be international as well. Our job is to stop the war in Iran, not defend the clerical fascist ruling Iran. So in terms of stopping the war, there was an opportunity this week in Congress. There were votes on a war powers resolution bill that would have said stop the war in Iran. And in the Senate on Wednesday, it was defeated 53 to 47. In other words, if 3 votes had flipped, well, actually 4 votes, because Vance is the tiebreaker, we would have passed it in the Senate. And the Republicans stuck with Trump, except for Rand Paul of Kentucky. But John Fetterman was a Democrat who joined with the Republicans to vote against this bill. So then on Thursday, the House voted, and the resolution to use the War Powers Act to stop the war was defeated by 219 to 212. So that basically, if we'd flipped 4 more votes, it would have passed in the House. Now, 4 Democrats voted with the Trump Republicans: Henry Cuellar of Texas, Jared Golden of Maine, Greg Landsman of Ohio, and Juan Vargas of California. And 2 Republicans voted against the war: Thomas Massey of Kentucky and Warren Davidson of Ohio. So, it's close. We need to win some Republicans over. And we're going to get a chance because despite the fact that Congress shoveled over $900 billion to the Pentagon this year, the cost of the wars are not included in that appropriation. So Trump is coming back to Congress for $50 billion to fund the war on Iran. And we don't have a framework for when that vote might come up, but that's our next chance to stop the war. And, you may remember, those of you who were around during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, that, Bush and then Obama had to keep coming back to the Congress for appropriations. And in the House, the Democratic Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, made sure the votes on this came after midterm elections so they wouldn't be campaign issues. Terrible. And the Democrats now will not vote against war supplementals unless we make it an issue this year in the midterm. So it's not too soon to begin contacting your senators and representatives to vote against this supplemental funding. And it should be a central issue and demand for Greens running for office in the midterms. So, at the same time we fight to stop the U.S.-Israeli aggression on Iran, we need to extend our solidarity to the feminist pro-democracy, women life freedom movement in Iran, to the Kurds, the Balochs, and other oppressed nationalities in Iran fighting for their human rights, and to the working class and even small business insurgency we saw in February inside Iran that was challenging the fascist theocracy. And, these movements, often led at great personal risk, seek genuine social and economic justice, gender equality, and democratic freedoms. Our role is to amplify their voices, support their campaigns, and build real connections with them across borders. And it's not just morally right to extend this solidarity. It's essential for our internationalist mutual liberation from capitalism and authoritarianism, and the creation of a world of full economic and political democracy. So, we have a stake in this too. We need to support our Iranian brothers and sisters who are pushing for a progressive change in that country. And, I just got to say, we need to be clear about the reactionary nature of the campus left that dismisses and denigrates these movements for national and democratic revolution in Iran. Their support for the supposed anti-imperialism of clerical fascists in Iran is supporting fascism, not liberation. And siding with supposedly anti-imperialist fascist states is an anti-imperialism of fools. Fascist states are not going to end imperialism. In Iran, the armed force of the Islamic State, or the Islamic regime, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Force, and its affiliated foundations control 30 to 40% of Iran's economy. They are the capitalist class. And they're in construction, energy, telecommunications. They control the ports, they even control the black market trade. So clerical fascism in Iran is state-sponsored crony capitalism for the state's repressive thugs. And, to have any support for that is, nothing that anybody on the left, anybody self-respecting leftist should support. It would be like supporting Imperial Japan in World War II as anti-imperialist because it was fighting the imperialist West. Taking sides in inter-imperialist wars is not going to end imperialism. It has to be defeated by an internationalist left of organized working and oppressed people around the world. And, so we should be linking up with progressives in Iran and its diaspora, to fight to stop the war, but also help them, exert their democratic rights in their movements. And, There's no way around that if you're on the left. So enough about Iran for now. I don't know if you noticed, but we started another war for oil in Ecuador this week. In August 2023, Ecuadorians voted by 59% to ban oil drilling in the Yasuni National Park in a referendum that the indigenous communities forced on the government. And now the U.S., in the name of fighting, drug cartels, has joined with the reactionary president of Ecuador, Daniel Noboa, whose family shipping business is allegedly linked to cocaine trafficking. There is a lot of cocaine traveling from Colombia and Bolivia through Ecuador to markets around the world. But the Ecuadorian people don't want the U.S. military in there. They rejected in a referendum a proposal from Noboa to reopen U.S. military bases in Ecuador last year. But U.S. militarization is solidifying now a narco state in Ecuador based on organized crime and drug trafficking, and a petro state based on oil extraction. Chevron, can't wait to get back into Ecuador. You may remember we've talked about it, Stephen Donziger, who won a case against Chevron on behalf of peasants and indigenous communities, and was taken down by the crassest lawfare here in New York with crooked judges and prosecutors that were prosecuting on behalf of Chevron. It's one of the biggest legal scandals, you could ever see. So Ecuador is now the 10th country that Trump has attacked, in addition to Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Nigeria, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. That's just in the first year. And, you may have seen these idiots in the pseudo-left blog and podcasts say Trump was the lesser evil peace candidate. Their silence is deafening now, and it's indicting what they said. It's amazing they even got a hearing. Moving on to the genocide in Palestine. Nick Turse published in The Intercept, and we'll put the link to this in the chat, an article documenting that all the nations that have joined Trump's Board of Peace are major abusers of human rights of their own citizens. I mean, the Board of Peace is a authoritarian's board. And, Jeffrey Sachs, who a lot of people like to quote against solidarity with Ukraine, said on Monday that the BRICS nations should band together to stop the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. And I just have to ask, what planet is Sachs living on? The BRICS aren't coming to Iran's rescue, even though Iran is a member. BRICS member India, led by the anti-Islam Hindu fundamentalist Narendra Modi, is cheering on the U.S.-Israeli war. South Africa, a BRICS member, is still providing Israel with coal that is used to produce 15% of Israel's electricity. This is 2.5 years since the genocide in Gaza began. There are 6 BRICS members that paid $1 billion to join Trump's Board of Peace, whose purpose is to complete the genocide in Gaza with a resort-centered real estate development. And, I want to name them: Egypt, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, the UAE, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. Patrick Bond, who we've had on this program, the South African political economist and leftist, he called Sachs drivel, quote unquote, banal hype. I mean, the BRICS they're a club of capitalist states. They're interested in profits, not anti-imperialism, despite the hype. And, I just got to ask Wendell Greens and other people on the U.S. left who are lifting up Jeffrey Sachs, who was the neoliberal shock therapist whose economic advice plunged Russia into the fastest and deepest recession in the history of world capitalism, or world history of capitalism. When are they going to stop, giving this guy credibility and lifting him up? Or platforming. It's kind of pathetic for people who think they're on the left. And it's also telling that a BRICS member, Russia, condemned the U.S. attack on Iran without a critical word about Trump. Russia wants to keep Trump on their side for its war against Ukraine. Russia's benefiting from this war because the extreme spike in prices for oil and gas is going to refund Russia's war machine, which oil and gas revenues have paid for 30 to 50% of Russia's national budget over the last decade. And Russia's military budget is 40% of its national budget for its war in Ukraine. In 2025, its oil and gas revenues fell by half due to low oil prices and sanctions. Now the high prices are going to put money back into the Russian state and its war machine, at least in the short run. In the long run, if a Western-friendly regime emerged in Iran and the oil sanctions were lifted, countries now dependent on Russia, like China, Japan, India, Turkey, will have an alternative source of oil. But that's the long run. In the short run, Putin has to be thanking Trump. Another angle is that the U.S. has been running short of air defense missiles. They've been using very expensive Patriot and THAAD missiles to hit $30,000 Shahed drones at $2 to $3 million per missile. Ukrainian interceptor drones can do it at about $1,000 a drone. And so now Ukraine is selling those drones to Gulf states and the U.S. So they have a cheaper way of shooting down Iran's Shahed drones attacking them. And you can understand from Ukraine's point of view why they're doing this, because Iran supplied Shahed drones to and licensed the manufacturer to Russia. And in fact, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps technicians were on the front lines showing the Russians how to use those drones. So there's no love lost between Ukraine and Iran, given Iran's support for Russia in its attack on Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is doing a favor to the U.S. selling them these interceptor drones, but you can be sure Trump is not going to return the favor. Last week, Trump called Zelensky P.T. Barnum, which is a case of projection, what psychologists call projection, if there ever was one. Projection is where you project onto somebody else your own behavior. And Trump is obviously the lying con man. And I have to say, him and his advisors are also just dumb as rocks. They should have figured out that they need interceptor drones instead of drawing down their inventory of air defense missiles at enormous cost. And because those missiles have been drawn down, they've been diverted from Ukraine, which has bought them, and they haven't been delivered. So maybe there's a silver lining here, because Trump's people are dumber than dirt, and they make George W. Bush's stupid war in Iraq look genius by comparison. Trump, Hegseth, Rubio, and the holy warriors now dominating the general staff of the U.S. military are going to self-destruct. And I'm literally talking about holy warriors. We got three apocalyptic religious, ideologies going on here. You got Christian nationalism, and we've got reports that U.S. commanders are preaching to their troops as they begin this war, that this is a holy war, and it's going to bring the apocalypse and the return of Jesus. And then the Israelis have their apocalyptic vision that this is going to bring the return of the Messiah, and the Islamists have their vision, the Shiites in particular, that this is going to bring back, their, savior. So we got religious nutcases fighting this war, leading these states, and it's just a hell of a big mess. But the silver lining is I think Trump is losing domestic and world opinion support and thus the ability to continue the war. And so they're self-destructing, and our job is to help them self-destruct. So it's probably enough said, and let's hear your questions and comments. Vicky Corden, I heard Putin is telling the Iranian army the location of U.S. forces. Yes, that's the reports. That is one form of military aid that Russia can and probably is giving to the Iranian military forces. And that was brought up, I think, before Hegseth, and he kind of shrugged like, yeah, we know that. But, you know, and so on the one side, Russia's attacking U.S. forces. On the other side, Putin's doing all he can to help. I mean, Trump is doing all he can to help Putin get a so-called peace deal that basically has the Ukrainians capitulating to Russian occupation and domination. I mean, it's hypocritical, it's self-contradictory, but you got to expect that from Trump, who is just not a very smart guy or moral guy. Scout Trooper 164. This isn't a holy, it's the Epstein war. Also, it can prevent the Epstein files release. I think that's the motivation as well for Trump. And he's not on a holy war, but the problem is there are commanders in the U.S. forces that are crusaders, including Hegseth. I mean, he's got this preacher that's, preaching the apocalypse, and this is bringing about the apocalypse and the return of Jesus. So, there are a lot of motivations here. There's oil, obviously. There's Epstein, the diversion, and there's, these holy warriors, and all, the American camp, the Israeli camp, the Iranian camp. It's a toxic brew. But like I said, I think the Trump people are self-destructing. This war is not going to help them in the November elections. The American public doesn't like this war. And the longer it goes on and the more American casualties there are, the worse it's going to get for Trump. So, we got to take advantage of that situation to stop the war. Scout 164. Seriously, who names a war operation Epic Fury? Teenagers, of course, or man children. Yeah, I had the same thought. It's like a video game. The name of a video game. It's we got, like I said last week, or maybe it was the week before, because last week I was in Buffalo with the Ukrainians. I wouldn't hire any of these people that Trump is brought on, or Trump himself, for a menial job. They're incompetent, they're dishonest. They would, they're mean-spirited people that would start stuff with, ethnic minorities and, LGBTQ people, women. It's just astounding that they are in charge of the biggest military in the world. And they're, like I pointed out, they've attacked 10 countries this year. It's, if somebody had written a novel, a decade ago that this is what would happen, it'd be kind of tossed because it was too fantastic. It wasn't realistic enough that people would follow it. But here we are. Vicky Corden, any thoughts on the war with Iran and a lot of news being censored, and there are more U.S. casualties? Yeah, I wonder if we're getting the whole report. I wonder if we're getting the whole report on damage to U.S. military bases in the Gulf states and Iraq. That's one question. We're getting very little news out of Iran itself because the internet's been cut. I was on a call earlier today with a couple of Iranian exiled leftists who said they can't reach their loved ones in Iran given the internet blackout. So, exactly what's going on in Iran is hard to say. There was a CNN reporter. I saw a report that he wasn't in Tehran. He was in another city, and he said, life goes on. He was at a gas station. People are pumping gas, shopping, acting like nothing was going on. So it's really hard to know. And I'm sure, over time, what is going on now, we'll find out later. And it's not going to be what we're being told now. Scout 164. Howie, this was something covered a few weeks ago, but it was said Harris lost the election because the response to Gaza was poor. Got a reply? You thought it was billionaire money. If you go back to my article, A Political Paradox, a progressive leaning public elects a right wing president, you'll see the polling data that I cited. And Gaza was just not high on the list of voters' priorities. It was pretty far down, except for a minority. I'm sure we know Harris lost votes because she wouldn't, say anything against Biden's policy supporting Israel's genocide in Gaza. The question is how much support. There was a poll from the Council on American Islamic Affairs that said it was decisive, but that was an outlier. And this recent poll, said she lost votes. As I remember reading it, I couldn't really tell if they, had any concrete number that she lost. So I think it hurt her with some people, but it wasn't the decisive factor. The decisive factor was, not just that she bragged she had more billionaires supporting her than Trump. It was her economic message did not resonate with people that were feeling the inflation and economic hardships that Trump at least acknowledged as a problem, even though he didn't have any solutions for it. She just seemed oblivious to that. And her whole campaign was directed at winning over never Trump Republicans, which was a small cohort, rather than mobilizing the base. So the total vote for her was down about 10 million from what Biden got. And she lost it mostly in Black and Latino communities. They didn't vote for Trump. Some did, but a small number did. Most of them just stayed home because Harris just wasn't telling them that she would do anything for them. And I think that is the biggest factor. Gaza was a small factor, but I don't think it was the decisive factor. And you can go back to that article, Political Paradox, and look at the polling data I cited and see what you think for yourself. Scott 164. It was also because she didn't distance herself from Biden enough. It kept being a neoliberal. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Exactly. And that didn't resonate with voters, so she got 10 million less votes than Biden did. The Green Garrett. There was apparently a new drop of Epstein files on Friday with more accusations against Trump. Why isn't Epstein sticking as much and being used to end the war and impeach and remove Trump? Well, I think the Iran war is, getting more eyeballs at this point for the media and the social media. But, what was released on Friday, that's been reported on. It's more details of a incident we know about. There's an accuser that says she was like 13 to 15 and Epstein got her in a room with Trump and Trump wanted oral sex and she bit his penis hard and she threw him out. That's the story. And so there's more detail of that interview the FBI did. So that's where it stands, and that has got some attention. I think some of the media, MS Now, is sticking on Epstein, and some of the members of Congress. I don't think Epstein's going away, and I don't think the war in Iran can make it go away. So I think Epstein, he's lurking in the background, and he's not going away, and it's not helping Trump. So I think just right now the headlines are this new war on Iran, so it's getting more attention. But Epstein's still there, and he'll come back. Anthony Au. North Carolina Democrats are frustrated with the amount of support Brian McGinnis is receiving across the nation. They're asking outsiders to stay out of North Carolina politics, and they're talking a lot about the Greens. Well, that's going to help the Greens. I mean, when AOC attacked Jill Stein, I said that was going to, help Jill Stein get her more attention. So, the Democrats are not the smartest campaigners. I mean, they lost to Trump, for God's sake. The Republican Party is the most reactionary, anti-worker, anti-environment, anti-woman, anti-minority party since the Democrats were the party of white supremacists in the post-Reconstruction era. And the Democrats can't landslide that, even though we know from polling, it's in that article I just referenced, strong majorities of Americans are very progressive to the left of the Democrats by far on economic issues as well as social issues. The anti-racism, feminist, pro-LGBTQ positions, the public, and even immigration, the public has come around on that. So, good for the Democrats. They're helping Brian McGinnis by giving him more attention, and he deserves attention. I mean, he put his body on the line to try to speak out in that hearing, and they damn broke his arm, badly. So everybody should, look at Brian's website and send him some money. He's going to have a voice in this Senate election in North Carolina against the war. And, that's going to be a problem for the Democrat who probably doesn't want to take a strong position. Who is it? Roy Cooper. So, yeah, McGinnis, everybody should give him some support. And also, speak to your representatives. Why is this guy incommunicado? Can't even see a damn lawyer. His family, his campaign team. That's got to change. Via email, response to recent Green success in the UK. Okay, so that was, we haven't talked about that. Hannah Spencer won a by-election in a constituency that has been a Labor Party stronghold for a century. And Starmer's Labor Party is sinking. Farage's far-right Reform Party is rising. So the Greens ran a strong candidate. And I should have put that in my notes because that's something everybody should know about. Try to find Hannah Spencer's victory speech. It really conveys the working class sensibility and message she had. She's a plumber. And she talks about that and, how the people in that constituency, which is Manchester, it's the Rust Belt of England, where you have similar defections from Labor, like defections from the Democrats in our Rust Belt, to the right, to the Reform Party of Farage in England, to Trump Republicans in the U.S. And her message is, if Kamala Harris had ran on the kind of message that Hannah Spencer ran on, she would have won in a landslide against Trump. So, look that up. And it's really significant. Now the Greens are polling second behind reform, ahead of Labor and conservatives and liberal Democrats. The Greens are now the real opposition to the far right. That's how they're trying to position themselves. And Labor is just has no appeal. I mean, Starmer's a neoliberal. He's like Blair 2.0. The working class is abandoning labor. And the Greens are picking a lot of them up, particularly younger folks. Some of them are going to reform. And so that's going to be the big battle. Next week I'm going to have Frida Afari, who's a Iranian expatriate living in America, a leftist, to talk about the situation in Iran. I hope to have her today, but she was already booked up. I actually saw her on another phone call a few hours ago, but we'll have her next week. But we'll get to what's going on in the UK soon. There's a lot we can learn from how the Greens it's the Green Party of England and Wales. They have a separate Green Party in Scotland, a separate one in Northern Ireland, and a separate one in Ireland. But the Green Party of England and Wales is, they've grown from about 50 to 60,000 members. In September, when Zach Polanski was elected leader, he ran on a program to, have the Greens move to the left and much more vigorously confront, on social media and in demonstrations and in just the messaging, the right and labor. And it's been successful. Now they've gone over 200,000 members in just, September, October, November, December, in 6 months. And now they're getting ready for city council elections coming up in May. And the Greens are positioned to really expand. They already have just over 900 counselors. And I forget the total number of counselors in England, but they're going to substantially increase their base of local elected officials, which is going to set them up really well for the next parliamentary elections, where now they have, with the victory of Hannah Spencer, 5 members of parliament. And, for us, this is a winner take all, first past the post kind of system that we face, which is, should give us hope that, by organizing good campaigns, we can win some, significant seats. And the key to what the Greens are doing is they go out and canvass. I mean, when I was in London, in another part of London, I went out on a canvass that they do every Saturday. They canvass year round. And they have a piece of literature on topical issues. They knock on doors. Some people just take the literature. Some people aren't home. Some people, don't want to talk, but some people do want to talk. And so then they talk. And it's not as Mamdani said, we're not lecturing, we're listening. So they're hearing what people's concerns are. It's what we got to do to build relationships with our, community bases underneath, all the social media and mainstream media noise, which is distant and abstract, whereas that personal connection, even people that may not agree with our policies, respect the fact that we took the time to come listen to them. And, some of those people will vote for us just because they figure, well, I can talk to these people. So there's a lot more to say about that, but I think, definitely, we'll have a program focused on that. I'm trying to get Zach Polanski on the podcast, but I know he's super busy, given all that's been going on in the UK. So we'll see. And if I can't get him, I may, try to get somebody else. We've had 3 of them on recently. Your former trade union liaison officer, Matthew Hull, Victoria Ball, who's a Ukrainian British youth and climate activist, and Sasha Ishmael, who has been a Ukrainian solidarity activist, who was not in the Green Party until this recent growth. Since he was on the podcast, he joined the Green Party. So, the Green Party is growing by leaps and bounds, and it's something we should all be watching and taking lessons from. Kevin Rosa, what do you think of recent wins of James Tallarico and Frederick Haynes in the Texas Democratic primaries? Do you think this is a good sign for the defeat of AIPAC or just more opportunism? I haven't looked at them closely. I know some Greens have been tweeting favorably about Haynes and getting some pushback for that. But, there isn't a Green in that race. So, and I don't know a whole lot about his positions, just that they're generally progressive. Tallarico, he was running against Jasmine Crockett, who I know more about, and I think she's a pretty good member of Congress. I was kind of rooting for her without looking into it in detail. Tallarico, as I understand it, is kind of a Christian that Texas can relate to on that basis, as well as progressive politically. So I don't know if him winning that primary with Jasmine Crockett was a move more to the center than to the left. And Haynes, I don't know who his opponents were, but so I actually don't know a lot about those primaries. I'm just giving you my reaction when you ask, what do I think? Is it a good sign for the defeat of AIPAC? I assume so, because they both don't support U.S. policy supporting Israel's genocide in Gaza, is my understanding. So, is it opportunism because they see that's where the people are going? Well, I hope it's principled. That's all I can say, that they really oppose the genocide rather than saying, oh, now it's popular to oppose it and I'll oppose it. Response to Noam's firing and her replacement. Yeah, she was particularly poor representative of Trump and just kept, putting her foot in her mouth and then shoving it down further every time she followed up. Her replacement is a John Wayne Mullen, I think his name is, a senator from Oklahoma. I don't know a lot about him. I think he will, continue to carry out Trump's draconian anti-immigrant policies. So he may do so without provoking the response that Noam did, like Holman going into Minnesota and replacing, what's his name, started with a B, who was being provocative and just making things worse for ISIS operation. So it's probably a smart move from Trump's point of view to continue this policy that we need to oppose, whether it's Noam in charge or Mullen in charge of DHS. Scout 164, any thoughts on abolishing ICE being polled and is now being called widely popular? Well, people saw what it is on their TV screens. And, it's encouraging that people say that's not what we want. And ICE, they can see that they're, as police agencies go, particularly bad and particularly abusive of people's rights. And so it's good that, public opinion is saying, we need to, basically get rid of this agency and dismantle it and, put in place an agency on immigration that, treats people properly and lets them go through due process and, follows the law, including constitutional, protections like the Fourth Amendment against, unwarranted searches and, First Amendment rights to assembly and speak out. Chris Blankenborn, have you been following what's happening in Madagascar? The president has fled and the military has taken control. That's about all I know, Chris. I haven't been able to keep up on that one. That's another one that's there's a lot happening in the world. So I have not been following it any more than to just know what you said. The president fled and the military is in charge. One problem is, military coups in Africa, across the Sahel is one thing. Now Madagascar, um, it's, I often think in the 90s, we had a wave of, pro-democracy wave, the breakup of the Soviet Union, democracies formed in Eastern Europe, even Russia to some extent at that time, in South Africa, and in other parts around the world. Taiwan came into its own as a democracy after, right-wing dictatorial rule by the Chiang Kai-shek followers. It was a real expansion of democracy in that period. Now we're in a period where it's in retreat. Authoritarians are on the rise, including military dictatorships. And, my question is that what's going on in Madagascar? Sometimes these militaries take over and say, we're just going to be a transitional government so we can have elections. And then they sometimes say that and don't follow through, like in Sudan. So anyway, I need to know more about Madagascar to say anything else. Scout 164. While this is a case of enemy mine, do you have a response to Nick Fuentes getting so fed up that he's deciding to vote for Democrats? He's a MAGA bootlicker, but can't stand Trump anymore. Well, Nick Fuentes is a stone cold racist. So, I would keep my distance. Unfortunately, I noticed the Anthony Aguilar link, video had a hashtag to Nick Fuentes and also to Candace Owens, I guess to try to spread the message, but I would not touch those people with a 10-foot pole. Owens is a conspiracy nut, right-winger, and Fuentes is a white supremacist. So, the Democrats, if they were principled, would keep their distance as well. We'll see. Kevin Rosa, do you have any thoughts as to why there aren't larger protests against the Iran war like there were for Iraq? Well, number one, we had a long time to build up those anti-war protests against Iraq because Bush was, trying to build public support, and we were trying to counter it. And we built up such big demonstrations that the New York Times called us the world's second superpower, after the U.S., because, it was not only in the U.S., but in Europe and around the world. So we had longer time to build up. Also at that time, we had the peace groups and anti-war groups, the left. We had a broad coalition called United for Peace and Justice, where all these groups got together and hashed out what the demonstrations would be, what the demands would be, where they'd be. And we don't have that anymore. We got Answer in particular, just calling demonstrations and calling for people to join them, their demands, their tactics, their speakers, or they call us divisive. So it's top down. It's not semi-democratic like the coalitions we had leading up to the Iraq War. And so they become small demonstrations called by a marginal group. And, they get, the activists out to oppose the war in Iran, but they aren't doing the organizing and building the coalitions that's needed for a truly mass movement against the war. I think that's a challenge we have, instead of just being led around the nose by sectarian groups like Answer, can we, get the peace movement and the left, have some conferences where we, talk about what our approach is, what our demands are, and, what we're going to do. That will take time. And I don't see initiatives. I mean, what I see is the different peace groups telling people to write their members of Congress. I just told you to do that. And Answer calling people to, go out on the streets. And those groups don't work with each other. I mean, the Green Party had two of the three co-chairs of United for Peace and Justice in 2004. And United for Peace and Justice, the broad coalition, after the demonstration in the fall of 2004, said we're never working with Answer again because they're untrustworthy and sectarian and We just can't work in coalition with them. Very few Greens remember that. Basically an anti-war movement that is broad and inclusive and democratic to some extent needs to be built. We don't have it now. We have the peace groups with their little funding and their, online presence asking people to contact Congress, and we got answers telling people to go to the streets, but they're not talking to each other. So the audiences are narrow. So I think that helps explain why there haven't been larger protests. We know from public opinion this war is not popular. I know one poll just before the war said only 21% supported an attack on Iran. I think I've seen some other polls where, more of the Republicans are now supporting Trump, but it's a minority support by far. So the potential there is for protests. And we need them. We need to make it clear, particularly to the politicians. I mean, these protests can influence those members of Congress on how they're going to vote on this war supplemental coming up. So anyway, that's why I think the protests have so far been small. We'll see how it goes as this war develops. Via email. Oh, I guess he meant to put up the cryon. So another hour has passed. As I said, next week we'll have Frida Afari, who's a Iranian socialist feminist, has ties to Iranian leftists in Iran and around the world, although those ties are cut right now in Iran because of the internet blackout and the war. To talk more about Iran, the war, the prospects for the progressive forces in Iran, and what we in the international community should do about that. So that's next week. And in the meantime, stay active, be involved in a group. What we do does make a difference, and we're going to make a difference. I think we have a good chance of preventing the funding of this war. If we do contact our members of Congress and get out on the streets, we have a good shot at cutting the funding for Trump's war, and then he's going to have a hard time continuing. And if he does, we create more grounds for his impeachment. So there's a lot of work to do, and I hope everybody stays active, stays hopeful, and we'll see you next week.